I've been looking at this picture for a little while, thinking about what I need to do next. I like to do this on a painting every so often, stop and sort of reassess where we're going to go next on it, because usually there's at least two ways that you can approach everything. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to debate here is whether to put some color on this dock now. The feet are going to come in dark and in on top of there, but I could put some of that color of the dog in and let it dry before those feet get into it. Now the dog itself, I usually like to work with building up a couple of layers, and so I'm going to want to put a pale brown layer on this dog anyway, so I could do the dog and then bring that color right up and in onto the dog. I'll want to shift it, keep this feeling of yellow up there and around those edges. So when I put that brown on, I want to be sure and not obliterate it. And I want to put it on as the lightest color that I see here. So there's some light in underneath of the edge of the bottom. There's a little bit of light up on the top of the back. And so I don't want to put anything any darker than those colors on there to start with, because if I do, then they'll be too dark and I'll have to do lifts, which I may still have to do, but at least sort of avoid having to do too many lifts as I build that up. So now we need to make a gray brown for the dock. The dock is maybe a little bit more gray blue, and there's blue in underneath of here, so that's going to come up through as well. And the dock is, I'm going to ignore this post. There's a couple leaves on here. That's something that might be interesting. I might think about doing one of those. And there's some dock lines that run through there that may or may not be important. So let's go ahead and build up a gray-brown. I can still use those exact same colors I used before, which, if you remember, were phthalo blue. And I just put some fresh phthalo in here. It's soggy wet. Let's see, I need to push it over anyway. That should get me so much phthalo blue, I've got enough to build 500 things. What I may want to do is just over in this other pan over here, remember we had mixed a little bit of burnt sienna. Because I've got so much blue there, it's going to be hard to put brown into it and still control it. So I'm going to use it as a reservoir to pick a little blue out of to add over into this other mixture of brown. So that was burnt sienna with phthalo blue. And I'm liking that. Let's see how it looks on the page. That looks fairly good. So my dock only comes to here. I'm going to just paint right across his legs, but quickly come back. I don't want to spend too much time, and this only goes a little bit past him. And my line, I think I went past that corner, but I'm not going to get too worried about it. Okay. And I was following that same line that those dock boards are, so that as I build this across, if I have some changes in color, it won't matter, because each one of those is going to be a board that comes across through there. And on this far side, on the right side, it looks like there's some moss and things like that, so I'm going to want a color shift there anyway. So this is one of the things that, brush marks are somewhat inevitable in our painting. So if we paint the direction we want the color and the light and dark shades to go, then it won't matter at all. Now I want to quickly get this up and into his body, because I'm going to have some, and I already have some hard lines here. Gotta come in and do a little lift across there. And I just painted out where I didn't want to there. Darn, I don't like this. And we've got phthalo blue, remember? Phthalo blue is going to just stay there with a gangbusters if I don't get it out right now. Okay. It's the disadvantage of using phthalo blue, and so I want to work across that. And let's just, his feet come down through here. Let's go ahead and find that. Margaret, get your head out of there. When I'm doing something detailed like this, I really want to just put my head right down in there and really look at it close. So I'm fighting with myself here not to do that. And as you see, I'm not totally successful. And I've got to work relatively quickly here because my brush marks are really showing. Maybe I shouldn't have encouraged you guys to use phthalo blue on this. If I had used ultramarine blue, it's going to granulate easier, but it also doesn't leave stain marks quite as fast and easy as the phthalo does. I like the color that this phthalo is making, though. So we're following the brush marks, and that needs to get thinned down just a little bit. Let's thin it really quickly. I just went into my water and put a little more water on my brush. And remember, that was a little hole in there, so got to keep that. Boy, fighting with myself this morning. And we wanted a little of that gold to stay out on that edge. This is going to go darker anyway, so let's just go ahead and put some darker in on top of it. And remember, this edge up at the top here, we wanted it to be a little bit gold. So what I'm going to want to do there is thin it. And let me just stop at this collar because that's a place where I can stop and have it fine. And then rinse my brush, dry my brush a little bit, and pick up the edge of this to make it lighter at the top. So this color is going to come in on top of that yellow and make it a gray yellow. And then his tail, let's get that tail, it's going to go right up into there. And his leg here, let's see if we can make that happen. This is pulling apart a little bit. And remember, well, no, it was actually on my other painting. I'm liking that this is pulling apart a little bit and making some variation in that color. But I have to be sure and keep my brush marks looking like it's his muscles or his thigh. And I'll put a little more back down in there, so that I can be happy with the brush marks that are in there, because there are brush marks in there. Now his collar is red, so I want to leave that out. And let's see, that comes up just a little bit more there. God, I hope my hair is not in the middle of what we're doing here. I did pull it back today, so there's a little less of it sticking out. So hopefully that helps. I'm leaving just a little light around that ear because I want to know where it is. And then his jawline comes back this way. Well, those two colors are separating like gangbusters. Pretty, but separating. Now, while this is still wet, I can come in and do a little darker, thicker layer on top of it. So I'm adding a little more burnt sienna to it because I want to have this shift a little more into the brown color, and just a touch of that blue. Is that enough? Let me make a little bit more because I don't want to run out halfway through. Better to make, you know, close to a teaspoon. And this is relatively thick paint because I want it dark. If I thin it, it's just going to go back to the color that I have right there. So I want this pretty thick. Okay, so then let's start back here. Okay, I'll start with the tail because then I won't be coming across it again. So I'm going to start with that tail, make it a little darker as it comes into his body. And I'm going to need to come in with it slightly thinner, but I've got a lot of paint on my brush, and so rather than going in to my water right now, there's just a little that comes over here. So I'm making this pretty much of a silhouette. The top of his foot might be a little bit lighter. Get that right out to that edge. So like when we did that little sketch, we're wanting to just get the shape of this working. And that dock is already dried enough that it's not a problem at all. And now I can grab the bottom of that tail and bring it down through the middle of this, because this is where the darkest area is. Let's go a little thinner up into there. I want to bring that over. I'm going to have to come in pretty quickly here to do some of these, and that comes in and it's sharp there, and then his toe comes down to a little point. Okay, so this is a good stopping point because I now have a dark area that's going to go next to this. So I'm rinsing my brush and I'm drying it 3/4 of the way so it's only damp. And now I'm going to come in because it's a little bit damp underneath of this already, and it didn't bleed as much as I hoped it might. So we're just coming in and doing a little damp edge on here. And we're taking that up and a little damp edge on that. And then comes out and over. There's a little lightness on there. And then a little damp edge. And I'm going to just leave that light at the very back of that. Okay, now I can come back in and start building my next darker space. Of course, I didn't make quite enough. So this is a control between how wet or how dry it is. If this is too wet, it's all going to bleed right into what I'm doing. And if it's too dry, I'm going to get lots of brush marks. So controlling that wet to dry, and it's one reason I wanted to go ahead and paint on this damp surface, is it's like pre-wetting my paper to give myself a little damp surface to work on. And I'm letting this dry brush just a little bit. That dry brush yesterday. I did some dry brush with my other class, and was finding that in some of these darker areas, doing a little bit of dry brush work was easier than trying to come in and really flood some dark in on top of the page. And then this foot has to come down, and then this leg, there's a little lightness there, but not a lot. So let's just maybe pull that paint. That works. And you can't quite see it in that picture. This is a point where if you don't add enough paint on your brush, it'll start pulling off the paint that's already there. So that's another reason to sometimes come in and sort of dab a little bit with dry brush. And then before I can paint his face, I need to mix up a little bit more paint. This is looking pretty good. And maybe just a little bit right there to sort of show that that tail comes in across this. And this is a little lighter. By the time that got up, I want to dry my brush halfway, 3/4 of the way, just picking off a little bit of paint there. It's going to help make his tail look like it comes across his bottom there just a little bit. And this foot feels too small now, so let me make it just, pull some of that paint out, make it just a wee touch bigger. Okay, so now, well, it's a big subject. This is always, it's very much of a concentration thing and really putting yourself into working on this without any real interruption. So now we're going to build up the face just a little bit. It needs just a touch more blue in there, just a touch. Watercolor is an interesting, I'm going to come back and do that red of his collar at the end. I think that'll be much easier than trying to do it now. And his ear, well, I've got a couple choices on that ear because I left that nice little light space when I did the mid-tone. I might be able to, and let's just try it. I can come back and lift it if I need to. It's likely to show through this as it starts drying. And if it doesn't, then I can come in after it's totally dry and lift it out. And his nose has a pointy end. And when it's half dry, I can even come in 3/4, dry that brush, really dry it down. Get that ear just sort of showing there. And then I can come back in and do a little harder lift on the edge of it to sort of crisp up that edge. Now I'm also seeing that his back here needed to, it's always a little bit of a risk to come in at this point because it can end up, and so I'm trying to come in with not too much paint on my brush so that I don't run the risk of it bleeding into everything else. But if I don't have enough paint on my brush, what just happened is going to happen. I'm going to just need to feed a little dark into there and then walk away from this. I'm not entirely happy with that dark layer that I put in for the dog's body, but at the moment I'm going to let that sit because what I feel needs to be done next on here is a little bit of balancing, and I can do a little bit of lifting for a few things. So let's see, the lifting, this ear that we had, I've come in with a little small brush, I've gotten it wet, I've dried it halfway, 3/4 of the way. I'm now going to lift the little bit of line on the edge of his ear. I can just take and rub this gently. And across the top there. And this is making a light area here. Of course, I didn't bring my dry clean rag over here, which I need to lift any excess off of there. This burnt sienna, and even with that phthalo blue, which is a bit staining, is lifting so easily. And then here, it's the good and bad thing about watercolor that it stays soluble forever, and with a little bit of water, sometimes that's all it takes, and it can be just lifted very easily. The eye, remember I was going, oh, I need to do something about that eye. I just want to be sure I've got it in the right place. The eye is right here. It's not much, and that may be all it needs to make that stand out. Now, was there anything else that I needed to, oh, you know, the other thing that's really bothering me, and I'm not sure how we're going to, I'm going to have to come back in and put a little bit more dark in on this again, but there's a dark light area here that I don't really like. So I'm just going to sort of pat that with water and try and move that paint around a little bit. I probably made a mistake using phthalo blue and burnt sienna together. They tend to separate quite easily. I haven't used it for a while, and it was separating much easier than I had remembered. So I created a little bit of a problem for everybody. The next layer on this, I could come in with the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, or I need to be much thicker with the brown in there. But let's just get a little bit of red into here. I've got a nice vermilion red. Do I want that vermilion red or cadmium red? Cadmium red. That's cadmium red. Yeah, and the vermilion is a little more orangish looking. You know, I don't think it's crucial which one I use. I think we're going to go with the cadmium red. So his collar is light and bright on the top up here. And it's going to go darker as it goes underneath. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and put some of this burnt sienna mixture into the collar at the bottom to darken it. Just here at the bottom. There, that looks good. Now, I'm going to just leave him alone for the moment. I want to let that go sort of dry. But to balance this out, I now feel that I do need to do some work on that horizon, the area in the back. And remember I said the horizon wasn't really as straight as it should be. So I rarely recommend using a ruler, but in this case, it is sort of handy to have it just as a reference of what's straight. I'm not going to necessarily paint to it, but I'm going to do a little lift right beside it. And so just want to come in and I want to do a little bit of lifting here right beside this ruler so that I can see that I'm doing that straight. And of course now I've got that wet collar right where my hand would go. And I just want a skinny line here because it's sort of like a little wind line. And then let's get that rag in on here. I don't want to lift his tail. There's a little bit of a reflection of the green trees in the water. So that's why the fact that there's some green that comes down and over this water space is not bothering me at all, because I want that to be reflected down in there. And maybe this area is going to be even a little more lightened. And then this is going to have to dry, and then you're looking at the photograph, there's a little bit of a dark line that will happen. And actually it's already starting to show as a little bit of dark line. I might not need it so much. That gets my horizon there really quite nicely. I'll just lift that a little tiny bit more right there. And that turns that into a horizon. Now I want to go a little bit darker with those trees. So let's have a look-see at this. And this was our mixture, our scary mixture. I'm going to put a little bit of ultramarine blue into there. And then let's throw some of the Hooker's green. This was Hooker's here. Hooker's green, if you remember correctly, is a little bit bluer than sap green. And so for these darks, sometimes it works really nicely. Okay, so is this going to be what I want? There's some orangey colors here. Yeah, I think that's going to work. You know, when we put that other down, we thought it was going to be so dark. And now that we've got this done, it doesn't feel so dark after all. We're going to just let some of that orange show through here and take this down maybe right to that horizon there. And there was a little bit, that other tree was there. So now I have to be careful when I hit that horizon. And I sort of liked those trees there. And then let's just break that into, let that sort of show as a tree there. And I want to throw a little bit sort of brown in on top of there just to make that a little darker feeling. Soften that just a little bit there. Okay, once I've done some of this, unfortunately, it means I've got to do more of it. And if we want a little feel of some of those houses, I can just leave little roof type shapes there. Make sure that comes to that horizon and stops at it. So as you can see, this is dry, but I'm coming back in with damp paint on top of it and building that next layer. So I know some of you had really only gotten the gold in to start with. Well, this can be done on each of the successive layers, and you can put in this little bit of damp space and then maybe add a little more color to it. I can put another bit in there. I can add brown to it and change that in while it's wet. So these trees, but we can leave some of the lighter spaces showing through too, and so that you get this combination of light and dark. So it's like there's little lights poking through the dark areas. And let's just bring that right next to his tail. And it allows us to do quite a bit of, that's right, the water line. A lot of building and just sort of keeping it gentle. And I'm doing a lot of just sort of patting with my brush so that I'm not overdoing the marks. And I still want to have this feel like foliage. And with foliage, it's this uneven little marking type thing that happens. I'm pretty happy with that now, but I also need to get it a little bit darker down in the water areas. So right in underneath of here, that's where my, and you know, that needed to be even a little browner. Yeah, I just put a little brown in on top of that green that I had there. Did what's considered a mix on the page. And this is, so I'm trying to keep this, so when I'm painting the water, I'm thinking of horizontal and vertical marks and not doing a lot of other marks, because when water moves around, it moves in those kind of directions. And you know, maybe I have a little bit of uneven stuff here, but we do want light up above his back, and that area right there, we wanted that a little lighter right above his back. So let that be a little lighter there. And here, same thing. We're going to be making this just a little bit darker and trying to, that piece there is this piece down here, and it's just a little sort of soft and broken up. And maybe that's going to get, it's not really in the picture, but I'm going to let that have a little break in there. Maybe it's going to come down into there just a little bit. But this has, if I don't darken this and it's dark up above, then it's not going to look like that same reflection. So, and the water is still maybe a value lighter than what's above because it's a water reflection, and the colors are maybe not quite as robust and brilliant as what they are up there, so that they can be dulled down a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty darn good. Now, let's see, there was a little spot back here that I didn't like very well. And his body, you know, that is looking a little better there. Do I dare? Now, one other thing that I'm noticing is that it's a little bit darker in the water right up here next to the dock, and that could be done. But I'm going to have to be careful as I get up to his body, because as we saw, that lifts really quite easily. So let's mix. This was my phthalo blue. Mix a little bit of burnt sienna into it. And let's see what's going to happen here. So it comes in sort of uneven here, and if I'm just very, very careful touching his body, I'm hoping that it won't bleed. Let's just take that up and on his body a little bit. And of course, it is bleeding a little bit. I want to soften this edge. I want to do it right now before it has a chance to and I'm just going to sort of pull that up with a little bit of soft marking up into the area up above. Because otherwise, that's going to end up just that little, that little light area underneath of his body there. But what I'll do after this dries is I'll come back in and I'll put a little bit more paint on his legs. So hopefully I haven't led you guys astray, as my husband likes to tell me. How many times have I suggested, oh, we could drive down that road. Oh. And then I'm going to soften those edges. Yeah, I'm going to bring that right up onto that dock a little bit. And then soften those edges by coming in with a damp brush and picking up the edge of this and moving it up. I think that looks better, having that just a little bit darker there. And softening that out. Okay. We're going to let that dry, and then I will come in with one more layer of dark on his body here. I think I'll be able to get that model look out of there. His face looks great. I don't want to touch that. This area back here looks good too. I think we want to leave that alone. But this area, I didn't get it quite dark enough when I put it on, and it separated and it looks very mottled. So I will come back and I'll do some more of that, but I need to let everything dry before I do. So let's do that. And we could also, these little leaves that I sort of painted down in here, they could use some lighter spaces in them. That looks better or worse. Better or worse. And oh, I know one other thing that can be done, and that is that he does have the beginnings of a shadow. It's a little overcast, so the shadows really aren't very strong, but I feel like there should be some shadows coming off of him. Oh, I like that better. That suddenly makes it feel like there's really some light running around him. And let's just soften the edge of that shadow at the end. Yeah, okay. Leave it alone now, Margaret. We'll let it dry. I'll come back and do one little last bit on his body, and then I think this painting is going to be done. Won't that be nice? I let this dry completely, and so now I'm going to do just the little final touches on it. So what we need to do is get the dog's body darker, and when I do, this little model look will basically go away. But I didn't get the paint quite thick enough there, and that's what the problem was, and it was starting to lift up. And it's one of the things that happens when you're painting dark, that if you don't get your paint quite thick enough, sort of damp and thick enough at the same time, you end up with this thing where the brush starts picking up little pieces of it and you get a very uneven mottled look. So what I'm going to do is mix a little bit more, and we're just going to stick with this same color. Unfortunately, if I go to change to ultramarine blue, at this point it's going to look different than the rest of the dog, so I've got to stick with what I did before. So this was the mixture of burnt sienna and phthalo blue, so I'm getting a little phthalo out of this little pile that I had on the and that feels like I still need to go a little thicker with that, so let me get some more brown into there. So the consistency of this should be about the same as heavy cream. So heavy cream will get you a paint that's thick enough that it will stay where you put it and will cover. That feels pretty good. And you know, I'm gonna add just a little bit more paint in there, just a little bit more, and then pick up just a tiny bit more of this to make it darker. Pull a little bit of that off the edge where it's a little drier, so I'm not adding extra water into my mixture. Yeah, I think if I put that on wet enough, it'll be fine. If I spread it, it's going to thin it down, but if I do it where I put it on fairly thick, I think we'll be fine. Okay, so now we have a nice start-stop point right here at his hip. And then it's going to go dark all the way down into here, and it's graded a little bit at the top. So we're going to put the dark paint in the bottom here to start with and bring it right down in on his legs. And then I'll grade it up. And then if I want to, I can come back in after it's dry and do just a tiny lift at the top of his leg there. So this is going to go right behind his hip, and I'm putting this on. So as you can see, it's pretty thick, and the fact that it was dark underneath of here helps make it be darker. And that comes through his body, down that leg, And now we're going to go down this leg, and I can leave just a tiny bit of light behind there. Maybe that's what I'll do. And then we want a little bit of that light between, we can't have it there, but that little triangle between the legs is important. And the top of his foot is probably lighter. So I'm going to just bring it in like that. And then this is going to go forward up to that collar. Yeah, going in a little thicker like this, it feels much nicer now. Feels like sort of butter going down on there. Now I've rinsed my brush, dried it 3/4 of the way, and then I'm going to just pull this up into his back. And I want to take it pretty much all the way to the top, because otherwise I might get a hard dry line on there. But I want it thinned as it goes, and then we're going to get a little bit more on the back of this haunch. And it's a little lighter on the front edge of that, so I'm going to have to grade that out a little bit. And once again, across his foot, we'll let a little bit of light be on the front of that. And I'm going to dry this again. So as you can see, even though maybe it's, and I dry that a little bit more. Now let's just pull this up. Let me, rather than talking, let me work here. And I want to crisp up this edge right there. Say his leg comes out here just a hair more. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, this is looking much better. I'm liking it better already. And that area around his tail, let's just sort of soften that a little tiny bit. And this is a case where if I come in with too wet of a brush, I'm going to start picking up paint again. So I need to be careful about that. And do I need to put some more, just it's pretty dark in there, but just to balance this. So this is relatively wet paint that I'm doing. It's not real dry. I mixed up a pretty good size thing of it. He has a little fur that hangs off the back there. And that dew claw comes up, and that's real straight down there. And then this foot, maybe it comes out just a tiny bit more. Okay, we like that. There's a little tiny ring. I don't, that post that was there was annoying me, was in the way. It's probably an important thing on that dog because they tie to it, but in the picture it's not an important thing. But there is a little ring right here, which maybe that's something that's worth keeping. And maybe just a line or two in here. I don't want very many of these, but just a couple to sort of give that feeling that maybe this dog has boards in it. Bring those out to that edge there just a little bit in a few places, but shorten it down. Okay. All right. Oh, and one other thing, his jaw right here had a little jagged look to it, and so with this thicker paint I can come in, get that feeling of his tongue there, and just correct that a wee tiny bit. Okay, I think we better stop. Stop. There is, I don't think it's important, there's a little ring to his collar here. And then if we have a little dark line there, then that sort of shows the other edge of that collar. It's drying right there. That looks fine. I think this is going to work out okay here. Okay, Margaret, stop while you can. Let's change the shape of that just a wee tiny bit. Okay, yeah, now he's got that little tongue almost hanging out, looking like he's ready to jump into the water there. Very cool, very cool. And anything else that I need to do in here? Putting a signature on it will be the last thing. I can use the same brush. Let's just go ahead and go with this darker paint. And I always like doing my signatures down here in the lower right-hand corner, leaving enough room that when I go to mat it, it's not going to be hidden. So you can also do this with a one of the water-soluble watercolor pencils because it's pure pigment. And a regular pencil can be used as well, but I do like to use whatever colors I've been painting the painting with, so that, and now let's just take this, it's already dried, pat it just a little tiny bit. I think that painting is finished. Dog is happy dog. Okay, we're done. Oh, you know, let me just, one other little comment that I want to make is that this painting is one where we've put in the lighter colors first. We've blocked out what the information is going to be with the lighter, brighter colors. And then with successive layers, and we've only used 3 or 4 layers, it hasn't been that many, we've slowly made it richer and darker and added extra color to it. So the dog, you know, we did that, went ahead and painted the blue through him because it didn't matter, and because those are all colors that are in underneath of his body. And then I did a medium dark, and then a come in and really put a super dark layer on, which took away all that mottled stuff that happened in that in-between where I thought I had totally screwed it up and was never going to rescue it. But now I think it's going to look pretty darn good. Same with that background. I did some of that wet and wet on top of the yellow, but it could have been done in successive layers with drying in between, where you let the gold dry completely and then you came in and did a layer with the greens. And just a little bit of brown with it to sort of tone it down, a little blue, and then let that dry and then come back in with that darker layer on top. So, you know, it can be done, the more layers that you do, sort of the more careful you can be with it. Sometimes if you try and rush it too fast, you end up with it just getting sort of smudgy looking. And so each time you come in with a wet against a dry, then you can get these harder, crisp edges again. When you have a wet, 2 wet areas together, then you get soft edges. So what's happened here, those are soft edges that have happened. Here, these are harder edges against the dark colors that were behind. And with this dark green on here, it sort of took a little bit of that sort of overly bright feeling that I had there with the orange and brown. So I'm pretty happy with it. Hope you guys are too.